Welcome to the Pivot Table series. And this series, and who knows how long it could be, but we're going to start delving into the specifics of pivot tables and how they work and how to make them do everything that you want them to do or have seen before. In the live training that we do, we don't really learn Excel, so to speak. We do learn it, but we learn it through building tools specific to your data. So we're not talking necessarily teach Excel, but you do learn Excel by working with your data and the tools. In this series, we're going to more or less teach Excel. How does Excel work? How do pivot tables work in relation to the data that you're giving them? So, of course, we start with the data. This is a soft pulled out of CRIS. Now, typically, out of CRIS, you are going to have your data come in the form of a table. They export to Excel, and it'll be in a table format. But I wanted to make a few points real quick because I know that you do see a lot of data that's not in tables. So first, the pivot table is going to work off a cache, and all a cache is a snapshot of the data you give it. If it's in a format like this, and let's say for some reason you're grabbing somebody else's data, I've just inserted a blank row, which essentially broke these two data sets in half. If we were to try to insert a pivot table now, it's only going to pick up A1 through H918. Now let's check that out real quick. If I hit Control End, it's going to take me to the end of the workbook. That's the last cell that Excel knows that is actively involved, and what it does is it stores information about all the cells that it thinks is active in a workbook. So I'm going to hit Control Home. Now what I'm going to do is hit Control and then down arrow, takes me to the end. So 918 is the last record. But if I hit Control and to the right, it's going to stop at H918. So we don't want that. We want our data to be together. So I'm going to delete this again. And what you really want to do is to insert a table. The table is going to give you that immediate contiguous range of data. It's going to keep it together. It expands dynamically. It's just the best practice, and there's not a whole lot of reason to go into data that's not in a table when we're talking about pivot tables. You just need to use data tables or tables. There are data tables in Excel that are not these. These are technically called tables. So we want a table, and it says Table Tools, and a lot of features and functions inside of tables. We'll do a separate series on tables and their functionality as well, but to use pivot tables, we want to use tables. The next thing, when you're looking at your data, the pivot table is going to do what the data tell it to do. That is to say, if the data is in a number format, it's going to add them, sum them, count them. It's going to do all those type of functions we can do with numbers. If it comes in as text, it's not going to add them. It's not going to sum them. It's not going to average them or do any kind of date math because it doesn't recognize them as numbers. So even though type vendor we can clearly see is 55544, it's not a number, so the pivot table is not going to know what to do with that. Typically what I can do in Excel is, let's see, fiscal year, it's taking as a number. See, it's aligned to the right. If it's aligned to the right coming out of a database, typically it's going to mean it's a number. If it is aligned to the left, as type vendor is, it's text. So if I highlight Excel, an Excel range that's numbers, it's going to, in this bottom right hand corner, if you've never seen this, it will sum it, count it, and average it. Okay? If I highlight this number here, and these numbers are small enough, I'm going, okay, that should be 20. It's counting. It's just doing a count because it doesn't know how to sum what it doesn't know as numbers. And if we come and select in here, we're going to go, we got blanks, we got numbers. Why did it do that? A couple reasons. It could have come out of the database as a text value. The database administrators and how they structure it could have just said this is text and that's all there is to it. Or it could have come into Excel, and Excel is going to take its best guess. And sometimes its best guess for what you are working with is not correct, and so you may have to do things later on to fix that. Also, the date range here, leave those as numbers if it comes in as numbers, as long as it is a value. as long as it is aligned to the right, and then for instance, if we come into home and then drop down under the numbers area, if we go to short date, it's going to say 6/16/2016. It recognizes that as a date value or as a number, and this is the date value of that number. If it were stored as text, it would say 42,537, so on and so forth. That's what it would say in this drop down. So you do want to check that stuff over, because again, the pivot table will perform as the data itself behind it is structured. One more thing real quick about your data. These are numbers. They are in terms of currency or accounting values is how we look at them, but I'm not going to change them so there's dollar signs or anything like that, or just come in here and slap a comma style in there, because it's not going to come into the pivot table like that. You're going to have to format those number values the way you want to see them in the pivot table, even if they're formatted properly here. It does not carry over. So all that being said, we've got our data in a data table. It's all together. We can come into A1. I'm going to hit Control End again. And we can see this little tag down here. It's one contiguous source of data for our pivot table to feed off of, and that is perfect. So I'm going to insert pivot table. And another cool thing about tables is it says Table 3. So select table or range, and as a best practice, let me hit cancel real quick. Design table. I said this was a status of funds, so I'm going to label this as Chris Soff in the table name. You can put underscores, you just can't have spaces. Okay, I hit enter, and now when I go to insert pivot table, it says table ranger name is Chris Soff, and that's exactly what we want to see. Much more intuitive than trying to track table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or how many you have. So this is a table. Select a table or range. We've got that. Could be an external data source. We'll go over that later. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. New worksheet is just going to create a brand new tab and put it on that worksheet, or an existing worksheet location. I'm going to select existing location and choose 1.0 pivot table. That's why I built this. So I'm going to select that range there. So it's going to say put this pivot table right in cell B2. The exclamation point means I'm doing a sheet reference, is what exclamation point means. There's one more option that says add this data to the data model. Whether you're using the Power BI functions, the business intelligence functions of some of the tools that are becoming available or not, in Excel 2013, there is a data model behind the scenes that you can use. I don't use it without the use of Power Pivot or Power Query, but that's what that checkbox is for. You can create relationships between data in Excel without the use of those Power functions. I haven't seen a particularly useful need or efficient use of that, mostly because when I have thrown the data in there before, it typically lags or it slows down a little bit. So I use the data model and the Power BI functions, but not in general for regular data tables. But you may find a good need for them, so explore if you so choose. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to place this pivot table right into the sheet where I asked it to be. Now, when we're working with this pivot table, now we have a pivot table tools option that we didn't have before, but it's similar to the table tools. It's going to give us a whole nother range of functionality. So just kind of working backwards, we have one here that says change data source. So this is where we can check to see what we're referencing. So if you get a pivot table from somewhere I can't remember, you go to change data source, and you just want to see, what am I selecting? Am I selecting this table? So for instance, if you lost some data or you wanted to for whatever reason reset the connection, you could come into here and select A1, Control Shift down arrow selects the whole range, and right arrow goes to the right. Now I've selected it again. I've selected the entire table so it recognizes Chris Soff. I'm going to say okay, but that is where your data source is from, and that's how you can check it within the pivot table. Okay, next series we're going to pick back up and look at some of these other functionalities inside the pivot table and look at formatting and how to start off on the right foot. See you then.